Everyone thought great white sharks ruled this coastline. Then two bent fins broke the surface. It happened off Gansby, a place once known as the great white shark capital of the world. Tourists came from everywhere to climb into steel cages and watch one of the ocean's most feared predators up close. That day, they were waiting for sharks. But the sharks never came. Instead, two orcas appeared beside the boat. One had a dorsal fin bent to the left, the other had a fin bent to the right. The guides recognized them immediately, Port and Starboard. And the mood on the boat changed fast. These orcas were not passing through. They were not chasing dolphins or playing near the surface. They had come for the great whites. In a single day, Port and Starboard were linked to the deaths of 17 sharks. Each body was opened with disturbing precision. Each one was missing the same organ. But the dead sharks were not the most frightening part. The real warning came from the sharks that survived. Great whites that had hunted these waters for years suddenly disappeared. They did not move a few miles away. They abandoned entire sections of the coastline. So what could make the ocean's most feared fish run without looking back? And how did two orcas with bent fins manage to change the behavior of an entire coast? At first, nobody thought much about the bent fins. Most male orcas have tall, straight dorsal fins. That's what people expect to see. But these two were different. One fin leaned to the left, the other leaned to the right. That tiny difference ended up making them impossible to forget. A local whale-watching guide gave them the names everyone still uses today. The orca with the fin leaning left became Port. The one leaning right became Starboard, just like the left and right sides of a ship. From that point on, researchers could recognize them almost instantly. Every sighting, every new shark carcass, every strange event along the coast kept leading back to the same two animals. Before 2015, orcas in these waters mostly hunted seals and dolphins. That was normal. It was what scientists expected. Port and Starboard had other plans. They started going after sharks instead. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Orcas are incredibly smart, and they hunt all kinds of prey around the world. But these two weren't just catching sharks once in a while. They were doing it over and over again. And every new case looked strangely similar. The more researchers paid attention, the harder it became to ignore the pattern. Those bent fins weren't just a way to tell two whales apart anymore. They had become a signature. Every time another shark washed ashore under the same mysterious conditions, people asked the same question. Was it Port and Starboard again? Most of the time, the answer seemed to be yes. But there was still one huge problem. Nobody had actually seen them make the kill. So how could scientists be so sure these two orcas were responsible before anyone had ever watched the hunt happen with their own eyes? The first clue showed up in 2015. At the time, marine biologist Alison Towner started getting photos from divers. They weren't pictures of live sharks. They were pictures of dead seven-gill sharks lying on the seafloor. Something about them didn't look right. These weren't messy attacks. There were no random bite marks, no torn-up bodies. Instead, every shark had a clean opening near its pectoral fin. The tissue had been pulled back with incredible precision, almost like someone knew exactly where to cut. Alison later admitted her first thought was simple. She thought a person had done it. The wounds looked so clean that it was hard to imagine any wild predator leaving marks like that. Then, everything changed. Later that same day, she found another fresh shark carcass. As she was examining it, two familiar orcas with bent dorsal fins swam beneath her research boat, Port and Starboard. That was the moment the pieces finally started coming together. What looked like isolated incidents suddenly became a pattern. Then, in 2017, the mystery got even bigger. This time, it wasn't seven-gill sharks washing ashore. It was great white sharks. Huge adults, some measuring over 13 to 16 feet long, began appearing along the South African coast. At first glance, they didn't even look like they had been eaten. Almost the entire body was still there. Only one thing was missing: the liver. Every single time. That raised an obvious question. Why go through the trouble of killing one of the ocean's most powerful predators just to take one organ? The answer actually makes a lot of sense. A shark's liver is like its energy tank. It can make up a huge part of the shark's body weight and is packed with oil. That oil helps keep the shark buoyant without using extra energy. It also stores the fuel the shark needs for long journeys and long periods between successful hunts. For an orca, it's one of the richest meals it can get. So from Port and Starboard's point of view, the shark wasn't the prize. The liver was. Everything else was just carrying it. This is the part that surprised scientists the most. Port and Starboard don't attack like you'd expect. There's no wild chase, no violent struggle, no long fight. Everything they do looks planned, almost like they've practiced it over and over. One orca moves in from the front, keeping the shark focused. At the same time, the other slips in from the side without much attention. Then comes the move that changes everything. One of them grabs the shark near its pectoral fin and rolls it upside down. The second that happens, the shark's own body works against it. It enters a state called tonic immobility. Think of it like a natural shutdown. The shark doesn't suddenly lose consciousness, but it becomes almost completely helpless. It struggles to move, can't easily roll itself back over, and can't swim the way it normally does. Since sharks need to keep water moving over their gills, losing that movement quickly becomes a serious problem. Port and Starboard know exactly how to use that moment. While one orca keeps the shark upside down, the other goes straight to the same spot every time. It opens the area behind the pectoral fin and removes the liver with incredible precision. That's it. No wasted effort. No random bites. No tearing the whole shark apart. They take the one thing they came for and leave. The entire hunt can be over in just a couple of minutes. And honestly, that's the part I find hardest to ignore. It's not that these orcas are stronger than great whites. Everyone already knew orcas were powerful. What's unsettling is how efficient they are. They aren't relying on brute force. They're using knowledge. They understand exactly how a shark's body works, exactly where its biggest weakness is, and exactly how to turn one of the ocean's greatest predators into a helpless target in almost no time at all. That's what makes this story so different. You're not watching a bigger predator overpower a smaller one. You're watching intelligence beat instinct. For years, scientists believed this hunt needed two orcas. The idea made sense. One flipped the shark and kept it upside down. The other went in and removed the liver. It was a perfect team effort, and every known attack seemed to follow the same pattern. Then, the cameras finally caught what everyone had been waiting for. In May 2022, drone footage captured the first confirmed aerial view of one of these hunts. For the first time, researchers weren't guessing from shark carcasses anymore. They could actually watch the technique unfold. That alone was a huge breakthrough. But what happened next was even bigger. In June 2023, Starboard did something nobody had ever documented before. He went after a great white shark that was about 8 feet long. And he did it alone. Port wasn't there. No other orcas stepped in to help. Starboard handled the entire hunt by himself. That completely changed the way scientists looked at this behavior. Up until then, everyone thought this technique depended on teamwork. It looked too complicated for one animal to pull off alone. Starboard proved otherwise. He adapted. He combined every step into a single attack. He flipped the shark, controlled it, reached the liver, and finished the hunt without another orca helping him. That tells us something important. He wasn't just repeating a behavior he had learned. He had improved it. That's one of the most remarkable things about orcas. They don't simply copy what works. They can adjust, refine, and make a successful strategy even more efficient. And honestly, that's where this story starts to feel much bigger than two unusual whales. Because if one orca can improve a hunting method, there's a good chance others can learn the improved version too. But even that wasn't the biggest consequence. The real story wasn't about the sharks that died. It was about the sharks that survived and quietly disappeared. Here's the part that really stayed with me. The biggest impact wasn't the sharks that died. It was the ones that lived. For years, False Bay was one of the best places on Earth to see great white sharks. Every winter, they gathered around Seal Island, exploding out of the water as they ambushed seals from below. It became one of the most famous wildlife spectacles in the world. Film crews came here, tourists came here. Local cage diving businesses were built around those sharks. Then, almost overnight, things changed. After Port and Starboard started hunting in the area, the great whites simply disappeared. Not because every shark had been killed, because they chose to leave. Scientists have a name for this. They call it the landscape of fear. It's actually a simple idea. A predator doesn't have to wipe out its prey to change an ecosystem. It only has to become dangerous enough that staying isn't worth the risk anymore. That's exactly what happened here. The great whites gave up one of their best hunting grounds. They changed where they traveled. They stayed away for weeks, sometimes much longer, even after the orcas were gone. Imagine walking away from your favorite restaurant because you know someone dangerous keeps showing up there. That's basically what these sharks did. They traded food for survival, and the effects didn't stop with the sharks. People felt it too. Tour companies that had spent years building their businesses around reliable great white sightings suddenly had fewer sharks to show visitors. Fewer sharks meant fewer bookings. A place once known around the world as the Great White Shark Capital started losing that reputation. What's fascinating is that Port and Starboard never targeted humans. They didn't attack boats. They didn't chase tourists. But just by changing the behavior of great white sharks, they ended up changing the lives of the people who depended on them. That's how powerful one predator can be. Sometimes it doesn't have to attack you directly to completely reshape the world around you. You might think that once the great whites left, everything else would just go back to normal. But nature doesn't work that way. When the top predator disappears, something else always moves in. In False Bay, that space was quickly filled by bronze whaler sharks, also known as copper sharks. They had always been there. They just lived in the shadow of great whites. Once that pressure was gone, they became much more common. Scientists call this mesopredator release. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. Take the biggest predator out of an ecosystem, and the predators below it suddenly have more room to grow. They spread into new areas, hunt more freely, and the balance starts to shift. That's exactly what happened here. The great whites pulled back, the bronze whalers expanded, then Port and Starboard adjusted again. They didn't stop hunting just because the great whites were gone. They started targeting bronze whalers and seven-gill sharks too. The story kept moving, and so did the changes. With fewer great whites hunting Cape Fur seals, seal numbers began to rise. More seals meant more pressure on the fish they feed on. It also created more competition for African penguins, a species that was already struggling. This is what scientists call a trophic cascade. One change at the very top of the food chain doesn't stay there. It keeps rolling downhill. One predator changes another. That change affects prey. Then it reaches fish. Then seabirds. Eventually, the entire ecosystem starts looking different. That's what I find so fascinating about this story. Port and Starboard weren't just changing how sharks lived. Without realizing it, they were reshaping an entire coastline. And all of it started with just two orcas doing something no one had seen before. Then came another discovery that made scientists even more uneasy. On the 24th of February, 2023, 17 broad-nosed seven-gill sharks washed ashore near Plettenberg Bay. Every single one was female. They were all about 5 to 8 feet long. Every body had the same clean opening. Every shark was missing its liver. And every one of them was found in the same area. 17 sharks in a single day. That's an incredible number. And researchers believe that wasn't even the full count. Not every shark that dies ends up on a beach. Many sink, drift away, or are simply never found. So the real number could have been even higher. But honestly, that wasn't the part that worried scientists the most. The biggest clue had already appeared in the drone footage from 2022. When Starboard made that famous kill, he wasn't completely alone. 4 other orcas were nearby. They weren't attacking. They weren't helping. They were watching. That matters because orcas don't just rely on instinct. They learn from each other. Young calves learn from their mothers. Adults watch other adults. New hunting behaviors can spread through an entire pod simply by observation. That's also why different groups of orcas have different diets, different hunting styles, and even different calls. In other words, culture matters. And that's where this story takes a much bigger turn. Maybe Port and Starboard aren't just 2 unusual whales. Maybe they're the first ones to figure something out. If other orcas begin copying this technique, then what we're seeing isn't just a rare event. It could be the beginning of a new hunting tradition. That possibility is what makes this story so fascinating. For decades, people saw great white sharks as the undisputed rulers of these waters. Now, the bigger question isn't whether 2 orcas can hunt great whites. We already know they can. The real question is whether more orcas are about to learn how. So, what do you think? Are Port and Starboard simply 2 extraordinary individuals? Or are we watching the first chapter of something much bigger?